What's going on, guys? My name is Wade with Tech Daily, and in this video, we're going to be doing a comparison between the new Samsung Galaxy A22 5G and last year's Samsung Galaxy A21. Now, this I think is a really interesting comparison because last year's A21 was an incredibly popular phone, especially here in the US on all those prepaid networks. And I know a lot of folks will be eager to find out if upgrading to the new A22 5G is worth it. And that's exactly what I'm going to talk about here. I'm going to go over what's new, what's changed, what's been upgraded, and everything else you need to know about both these phones. There's obviously a ton to talk about, so I won't waste any more time. Let's just jump right into it and see how the new A22 5G stacks up against its predecessor. So to start off, I do just want to quickly mention that the A22 we're talking about here is the A22 5G. There is an A22 4G or LTE model. It's a totally separate phone with different specs and features, and I'll have a separate video for that device since it is so different, but I just want to make sure we're all on the same page. The A21 here is also the regular A21. It's not the A21s. Again, totally different phone for a different video. Here we've just got the A22 5G and the regular old A21. Price-wise, the A22 5G right now sells for between $250 and $275 depending on where you get it, whether it be direct from Samsung, unlocked on Amazon, through a carrier, or anywhere else. And that I think is actually a really good price for this device. The $250 price point is what the A21 sold for at launch last year as well, but now you can get this device for as low as $150 unlocked, and potentially even cheaper than that through a prepaid network. Either way you go, both these phones I consider to be quite affordable, and it's nice to see that Samsung didn't bump up the price too much on this new A22 5G compared to last year. And if you're interested, I'll leave some links down below in the video description to where you can get both of these phones at their cheapest current prices. Physically, these two phones look kind of similar, but I think you can pick out more than a few things that set them apart. Size-wise, what's sort of interesting is that while the phones look to be the same height and width, the A21 is maybe a little larger. It's the screen on the A22 5G that's actually bigger now. The new phone is a 6.6-inch device. The A21 was a 6.5-inch phone. It's not a huge increase, but something worth noting. And the discrepancy in dimensions, I think, mainly has to do with the borders and bezels on the A22 5G shrinking just slightly. The selfie camera setup has changed, obviously, but in addition to that, the bottom chin is just slightly smaller, and the borders and frame on the sides of the A22 5G are a bit slimmer than the A21 as well. And that all means you do get a slightly better screen-to-body ratio on the new A22 5G now. Around back, both these phones are made of plastic, but obviously the design and finish differ quite a bit. The shiny, fingerprinty finish from the A21 has now changed to a smooth, matte plastic on the new A22 5G, and I do like this better. I think overall, the A22 5G now looks a little more premium, and the color matching frame I think completes the higher end look. Though all these changes are just aesthetics, you don't get any waterproofing or IP rating, no wireless charging either, so feature-wise, nothing else has been added. In the hand, the A22 is a little heavier and a little thicker too. There's less of a curve and taper compared to the A21. It's now more of a flat ice cream sandwich sort of design. And all in all, while it's nothing big, I think all these physical changes on the A22 5G do make the phone look a whole lot nicer now. Taking a look around at everything else, on the left side, both phones have the same SIM and SD card tray. On the right, slightly different volume buttons, but very different power buttons. The A22 5G's doubles as the fingerprint sensor too, while the A21 of course has its fingerprint sensor around back. Down below, the headphone jacks and speakers have switched sides, but they're all still there, along with the USB-C port for charging. And around back, we've got very different camera setups, which I'll go over in just a bit. So just two more quick things I want to go over before we talk about the specs and performance and all that stuff. With the out loud listening experience, the single speaker setups on both phones I think sounds mostly the same. I don't think anything has been changed or upgraded, at least not drastically, but here's an audio sample of both so you can hear for yourself. Now, the fingerprint sensor on the A22 5G I think actually is an improvement. Placement-wise, having it double as the power button makes a lot of sense, and with the unlocking speeds, the A22 5G also just feels quite a bit faster with both waking the phone up and getting to the home screen. I like that both phones do still have fingerprint sensors in general and that it isn't an in-display reader. The physical sensors are usually better, but that side-mounted setup on the A22 5G now I think is really great. And actually, Face Unlock feels quite a bit faster too on the A22 5G. Not only does the phone get woken up quicker, whether it's via the power button or a double tap, but it just jumps almost immediately to the home screen without delay. So getting into the A22 5G now is really quite quick. Okay, so on to the important stuff. With the displays, I already mentioned that the A22 5G gets a tiny bit bigger of a screen, but there's actually more to it than just that. Spec-wise, the A21 had a 6.5-inch LCD display at a resolution of just 1600 by 720 and 270 pixels per inch. The new A22 5G also has an LCD display, but now with a resolution of 2400 by 1080 at 399 pixels per inch. It's sharper, it's clearer, it's an upgrade for sure, just on quality and resolution alone, but the A22 5G also offers a 90Hz refresh rate mode now, called motion smoothing in settings, and this means the phone feels faster and more responsive with every tap, touch, and swipe. It might not be so obvious on camera here, but when you are flipping through the phone or scrolling through your apps, a high refresh rate display does make a difference. The A22 5G feels quick and snappy, super responsive, and that I think really adds something to the overall user experience. Also, with the color and viewing experience, to me, the A22 5G looks punchier, more saturated, more vivid. It's a nicer looking display from top to bottom. And overall, while it may not necessarily have been too heavily advertised, the A22 5G's display is significantly better in multiple ways compared to the A21. And I think most people will notice all the things I mentioned if they have these phones side by side. With the internal specs, this is another area where you'll experience some significant differences and upgrades. Inside, the A21 was powered by the MediaTek Helio P35 processor, just 3 gigs of RAM and 32 gigs of internal storage. Not a whole lot to work with. On the A22 5G, this phone gets the newer MediaTek Dimensity 700 5G chipset. It starts at 4 gigs of RAM with 64 gigs of storage, but can be bumped up to 6 or 8 gigs of RAM and 128 gigs of storage. And on top of all that, on the software side of things, the A22 5G already has the Android 11 update and One UI 3.1. My A21 here actually hasn't seen an update in a while, and I don't know when or if it'll get Android 11. Here are the Geekbench scores, so you can get sort of a numeric value of performance for comparison's sake, but in practice, actually using these two phones, with the bump up in specs and fresh new Android update, the A22 5G no doubt is the faster device. It's more powerful, more capable, no matter what it is you're doing. Everything from just your average Android apps to social media to even gaming, it's all going to be better on the A22 5G. And in fact, I think the performance upgrades alone are reason enough to jump up to the A22 5G regardless of anything else this phone has to offer. I never really considered the A21 to be slow or underpowered, at least when it first came out, but now side by side, I think the difference is clear, and in fact, I think the A22 5G is capable enough now to handle anything and everything you want to throw at it. While some of the higher end phones nowadays have only minor spec boosts versus their predecessors, the differences between these two phones are significant enough to definitely make the jump worthwhile. And if performance is what you're after, the A22 5G is absolutely worth the upgrade. And another thing that's been upgraded on the A22 5G, the battery is now a bit larger as well. The A21 had a 4,000 milliamp capacity battery inside. The A22 5G now has a 5,000 milliamp capacity. And I realize there are more than a couple factors at play here. 5G support on the A22 definitely sucks some more life out of it. The higher resolution display draws more power. The higher end specs maybe aren't as efficient. But on the flip side, you've got a better optimized Android experience. You don't have to use 5G, and the size increase with the battery I think is significant enough to actually yield some extra use during the day, regardless of all the spec bumps. An extra couple hours for sure, especially if you aren't a really heavy user. So for most people, I do think they're gonna experience better battery life on the A22 5G. The downside though is that There's no faster charging, 15-watt max support on both phones still, no wireless charging either, like I said. So no new battery power features, just a bigger battery capacity inside. So finally, let's talk cameras. And with this, there's actually a lot more going on than just a redesigned setup. Hardware-wise, the A21 had a quad lens setup consisting of a 16 megapixel main shooter, an 8 megapixel ultra-wide lens, 2 megapixel macro, and 2 megapixel depth sensor. On the A22 5G, the main lens is now a much improved 48 megapixel shooter. There's a 5 megapixel ultra-wide and a 2 megapixel depth sensor. We lose the macro lens, but I can live with that. For the selfie cameras, what's sort of interesting is that spec-wise, the A21 seems to have a better setup, a 13 megapixel lens versus 8 megapixels on the A22 5G, but in practice, which you'll see in a second, the difference is quite the opposite. With the software features and shooting modes inside the camera app, the A22 5G gets a few new additions, including night mode, hyperlapse, and slow-mo. Of course, you can shoot in a high detail 48 megapixel mode as well. Video capabilities get a slight bump up to 2K resolution, though that's not a big change. What's most noticeable here are the real-world results. And I do want to take some time to break this down because there are a lot of things to explain. So first off, with the selfie camera, while the specs, like I said, suggest the A21 might be better, that just isn't the case at all. The A22 5G gives you a much better result with the color and skin tone, the amount of detail, just the whole overall look of the shot from start to finish. And the default smoothing filter on the A21 is just over the top, I think. It makes my skin look unnatural, and even turning it all the way down in this next picture doesn't really help. Selfies look significantly better on the A22 5G, and I think this is the first of many worthwhile camera improvements. To me, added detail, better skin tones, and a more natural look are all what make the A22 5G better. With the rear camera setup, I do think at times the A21 actually produces a solid shot. In this first instance, my skin tone is maybe a little more favorable on the A21. Things are a little more pale on the A22 now instead. Though detail-wise, I still think the new phone comes out ahead. However, with a portrait shot, the difference is like night and day. The A21 is just all over the place with a reddish skin tone, crazy smoothing, not much detail. It's really not a good looking shot, while the A22 5G, I think, does a really good job here. All in all, I think the camera setup has really been improved on the A22 5G, mainly with the real-world results, even more than I originally thought. Side by side, there are crazy differences in a lot of instances, and I think Samsung put some worthwhile effort in making really solid improvements. If pictures are your thing, I think you'll be really happy to see what the A22 5G now has in store for you. So if it wasn't obvious already, I really do think the A22 5G is a big improvement compared to last year's A21. You get a fresh new design, upgraded screen, more powerful specs, better performance, and significant improvements with the camera setup and real-world picture results. I'm not sure you could ask for much more than that. Yes, there are still aspects to the A22 5G that make it a budget phone, but for $250 and compared to last year's A21, not only is it a huge improvement, but I consider it to be well worth the money. What do you guys think? Does the A22 5G offer enough new stuff to get you to upgrade? Let me know in the comments down below. I'd love to know your thoughts, of course. But hopefully you guys did enjoy this video. Be sure to follow Tech Daily on Twitter and subscribe to the Tech Daily YouTube channel if you haven't already. And I'll see you guys later.